Hello everybody! Welcome back, Raspberry fans, for another video today. And today we'll be reading one of my biographies of Mewni, Astrid, the Queen of Flames, daughter of Neptune the Compassionate. It's been a while, so make sure to check out that last video if you need a catch-up for my Star vs. the Force of Evil AU. But without further ado, I'm happy to introduce to you guys her biography. Please forgive me if I stutter, hesitate, and mispronounce anything, and for any noises in the background. Let's get started. Astrid, the Queen of Flames. The tale was spread throughout the land. The princess born without her hands, through fire and flames she has shown just how grand our kingdom can be at her command. Astrid Butterfly, the Queen of Flames. Born 11:54 a.m., died 12:32 a.m., reigned from 1173 through 1197, married to Joseph Miller, children Crystal Butterfly and Elizabeth. Astrid Lilium Butterfly would be born on the night of Squartook 77th, 1154, where the brightest and rarest star shone. She was born with rosebud pink hair, eyes green of new leaf, red pentagrams on her cheeks, little nubs thought to come from her grandfather, and rarest of all, the princess was born without any arms. The birth was not immediately announced to the people because, unknown to everyone but the royal Queen Neptune, King John, and their staff, the princess was born a few weeks premature and was needed to stay in extensive care for several days. Some of the royal doctors questioned the princess's lack of arms, but it obviously couldn't have been from being premature. They searched and searched, but ultimately they could not find any answer. The princess simply was, and the doctors all sighed in relief when she started to cry and show signs of healthiness. The kingdom cheered when the princess was shown at her christening, for they all feared she would be a flame like her father. Many were baffled completely by how the queen and king were able to produce an heir at all. Astrid was still basically your average typical baby, except as she aged she could not crawl, she could not stuff her fingers in her mouth, and she could not really play with her toys at all. Her life was limited, but the baby princess did not care and found her own ways of squirming around and chewing on whatever she could find. Her parents were by her side as she aged to help her and guide her in ways that she needed. The princess was also found to be immune to fire and burning, so King John didn't need to worry about burning his daughter. Astrid would learn to walk by herself at 2.5, and not long after she was running around the castle. John had taken up most of the kingdom's businesses, and Neptune had her duties as queen, but they found time to each play their part and spending time with their daughter. That was until she was 5 years old, and the girl was soon to start princess lessons. Neither the queen nor the king could devote all their time to the princess, so in 1159 they hired a girl by the name of Francesca Hutchinson to be Astrid's lady-in-waiting. Francesca, or Fran as Astrid called her for short, was 8 years old when the two met, and they immediately got along. Fran was there to be Astrid's aide throughout her day and lessons. She dressed the princess, helped her brush her teeth and bathe, helped tutor the girl in lessons, and was her hands when she needed them. Fran also spent extra time teaching the princess to bake, like Fran's family did for a living. Astrid couldn't really participate, but she loved to watch and taste all the yummy flavors. As the years passed, Astrid would come to consider Fran her sister, and they rarely spent time apart. In 1162, when Astrid was 8, she, Fran, and some of the castle staff were traveling to Fran's village. It was night and the people were resting when Fran and Astrid decided to play a game of hide-and-seek, but Astrid soon found herself lost in the woods. She walked and walked out, but couldn't find the path again. She began to worry and cry that she would never find home or her family again, and suddenly, in a burst of tears and sadness, as she screamed, a pair of flames burst out of her shoulders. She suddenly stopped crying to stare at the flames coming out of her. She moved to try to get away, but they followed her, were coming out of her. She started screaming more, trying to get them to go away, and she started to accidentally set the grass on fire, and then that spread to the trees. Soon the trees all around her were set on aflame and burning, causing the princess to panic more, and the more Astrid panicked, the more the flames grew and spread. Soon enough the people in her party saw the flames and lights of the forest, and knew where the princess had gone, but they struggled to get through the fire to her. It was taking too long. The fires couldn't stop spreading, so they called the queen herself to hurry and try to get them to help. Soon enough, the queen came flying in her butterfly form and shot a blast of magic to summon a cloud to put out the fires. She flew into the middle of the fire where Astrid was panicking more and more. Neptune was surprised and amazed when she saw her daughter, but knew they had to get her to calm down for the fires to stop. She put her hand on Astrid's shoulder, not caring that it might burn, and told her daughter to calm herself. With the sight of her mother and knowing that she was found, the princess stopped her worries and calmed, embracing her mother. Soon enough the flames fell and disappeared, even the ones acting as the princess's arms. The princess's calming was not the end, though, for the forest was still burning, and had spread to a nearby village. Thankfully, the queen was able to put it all out quickly. When she was done, she landed back near her daughter, and Astrid ran to her crying again and apologizing, saying she didn't know what was happening. Neptune comforted her and said that she didn't either, but they would figure it out together. After that day, the queen became much more involved in Astrid's life again, and together they tried to trigger and master the princess's flames. It was unfortunate that also after this day, the people would grow to fear what Astrid would do as a leader, and would she be bringing them down a dark path in age? Astrid would want to spend more time with Fran, her almost sister, but after a case of accidentally burning her, the queen decided it best that they part until the flames could be mastered. Fran was offered that she could stay in the castle still, but she chose to go back to her home, not knowing how long it would be until she would return. It would be 4 years of trying to master the flames and fire with her mother, as well as her grandmother Destiny. Astrid would get to see Fran here and there, but it was never the same, and she couldn't help but fear she would hurt someone. Astrid feared she would hurt her mother, but her mother held no fear for her. The only one Astrid didn't have to fear spending time with was her father. By the age of 12, she finally came to have mostly mastered her flames, and her mother then made her an iron-steel pair of prosthetic arms to help conceal the flames when needed. Astrid was overjoyed to see Fran again, to feel not afraid of herself, and to be starting to her magic training. 2 years later, in 1168, Astrid had her wand ceremony. When Astrid held the wand in her prosthetics, it floated up into the air and became a crown, landing gently onto her head. Astrid and her mother would then go into magic training together. It was hard at first, but the family all had fun together. Astrid quickly learned to dip down and exceeded the teachings her mother had for her. When Astrid wanted to write in the book of spells, she would have her mom, Fran, or her magic do it. Many spells were a struggle to do due to the form of her wand, but Astrid found her way rewriting them into her own. Astrid was happy to have her family all around her. The unfortunate day came on Splenix 25th, 1170, when her mother, Queen Neptune Butterfly, would be found dead after she failed to come down for dinner. Astrid was 16. The doctors didn't tell Astrid much at first, but they did tell her all the symptoms came from far too much exposure to fire and burns. Astrid ran to her room to cry, where she stayed for hours, mourning her mother and blaming herself. Her grandmother Destiny would come in to check on her at midnight, as midnight hit, and Astrid cried into her shoulder, before asking the old queen if she knew, where Destiny said yes, she did. The next day, the preparations for Astrid to become queen started to take place, but Astrid wasn't feeling very happy. They decided to put it off until the funeral was over. The funeral took place 3 days after the passing, and the whole kingdom mourned their queen, who had shown kindness and compassion to many of them. Astrid simply wished she had gotten to know her more, and that she had known of her mother's infections, that she could have done something to stop the outcome. At her death, they announced St. Neptune's Day, celebrating families, and Astrid wept once more. In the coming days, the castle was in utter chaos, people arguing and blaming each other. Most of the Butterfly family blamed Astrid's father, John, and honestly, Astrid did too, as well as herself. She felt darkness crawl into her heart, and said she would rather never have been born than have to live to have seen the day her mother died. Her grandmother comforted her a lot in these trying times. When it was time for Astrid to take the throne, and she said she wasn't ready, Destiny was there to take it for her until she was. The council was shocked by the decision, but accepted it. As days passed, Astrid felt like she couldn't get along with anyone. Everything she saw reminded her of her mother. She didn't want to speak to her dad, no matter how much he tried, and it was really just that everyone was mourning in their own way. It was Quark's second when Astrid told her people she would be going away for a while. She was going to attend Earth School and try to clear her head. In honesty, it was that she felt anger for the magic of her world and wanted to escape to where she wouldn't have to deal with it. Her family protested at first to her going, but with the help of her grandmother, they all came to understand and accept. Astrid said goodbye to Fran and that she'd see her soon, and then left. Astrid would then travel to and arrive on Earth, where she traveled to many historic locations in the butterfly history, and met up with some distant members of her family that lived there. Her arrival to Earth was an unfortunate timing, though, due to the school just coming out, so she decided to attend summer classes so she could catch up with her fellow soon-to-be juniors. It was there at Echo Creek School that she was assigned a student aide. He was a boy by the name of Joseph Miller, and Astrid would later learn the reasoning of him being picked to stay with her was because of the history his family had with the Butterfly Land, and that he was descended from the Johansen clan on his mother's side. Astrid was a bit wary of Joseph at first, but in little time they became good friends and got along. They stuck together in classes, and Joseph took notes for Astrid. She would sometimes use her magic, but preferred not to, and it was another excuse for Joseph to help her. Astrid excelled in math and won an award for the subject during her time on Earth. She and Joseph would get up to all sorts of adventures, and she made even more new friends. Astrid enjoyed time on Earth and honestly felt like it could be a second home. After Astrid finished senior year in 1172, she would return to Mewni. Her people missed her, and so did her family. Her father opened his arms for a hug, and she came to him returning it, saying she was sorry for ever blaming him. Despite Astrid's return, she was still not ready, she said, to be queen, so her family allowed her the time she needed. She spent the next year traveling around Mewni and other dimensions, visiting other schools and learning of different cultures. She even decided to invite Joseph to accompany her, and he learned more about his Mewni heritage. It was also around this time that the two would start to fancy one another, and not long after Astrid admitted it, the two started to date. To the surprise of the people in her family, once Astrid returned from her travels with Joseph, the two declared that they had decided to become wed. The rest of the family didn't like how they had been dating all too short, and the situation reminded them slightly of the speed of Neptune's wedding, but after a word from destiny, they all settled down. Astrid and Joseph would be wed on Grievance 21st, 1173. Everyone in the family attended, except for Fran, who had decided to move back to her village. Astrid's wedding seemed to mark their family reconciling and coming back together, moving on from Neptune's passing for now. There was a new age to begin. Joseph would ask Astrid the night after their wedding, why did she decide to marry him? And she said to him that she believed any two people could work together as long as they had love and were willing to put in the work, and that he didn't require much work at all. To this he asked her, then is there someone else you love perhaps, but they would require more work? And to this she did not answer. 2 months later, on Astrid's 20th birthday, she became queen and marked the start of the era of the flame. Not many of her subjects knew her, though, and many of them held on to the accidents of her past and were slow to trust her. Astrid would sigh, wishing she knew what she could do to gain her people's trust. Astrid's time to shine would then come in the beginning of 1174, when there was word of a rogue group of humans who were planning to come after the queen's throne as they saw her unfit. Astrid traveled to the butterfly summer home and waited out for news of their plan. Through her magic, she was able to learn they were bombing the summer home and planning to blow her up from the inside. Astrid knew she was immune to fire in general, but not to bombing, so she had to work fast. She had the castle evacuated so that it was just her inside, and then she waited for the rogues to enter, and when they did, she entered into her fiery butterfly form and blasted the TNT they held off, with them still inside. And she quickly flew out of the summer castle. To all people from afar, it looked like a fireworks show, but to those close, they could hear and feel the carnage of the bombs going off. Thankfully, no one of importance was hurt. The villagers were fine, and so was the queen. The only loss was the rogues in the summer home. When the queen landed down on the ground in her butterfly form of fire, the people stared at her in awe. Their queen, she was almighty. From then on they bowed to her in respect, and they knew they were in good metaphorical hands. That day would become known as St. Astrid's Day, celebrating her win in all wins against forces that tried to mess with the butterfly family and have failed. It was soon after this event that Astrid learned that she was with child, and that on Graven 16th, 1175, Princess Crystal was born. She had hair that was a yellowish green like white, not bearing resemblance to any of her parents or grandparents, so it was all a mystery, but not one the queen cared to solve. Crystal had black crossed-out hearts on her cheeks and green eyes like her mother and father. Crystal was a happy, laughing baby, and Astrid held her kindly in her prosthetic arms, giving her lots of loving kisses. Jos and Astrid were very happy of their daughter, and took pride in the rest of their family, taking interest in Crystal's life as well. In 1177, at the age of 42, Wardrobe would pass on, and the family met once again to mourn a butterfly monarch. Astrid did her best to comfort her uncle and her cousin Calpurnia, as well as the rest of the family. Astrid and her cousin bonded lots about both their mothers being gone. It was unknown why Princess Wardrobe died, but it was accepted as simply fate. The two promised each other their children and future children would be friends, and that they would stick together. Up until 1182, Crystal seemed to be happy and smiling, and mother and daughter did lots of fun activities together. Crystal seemed sad here and there when she was young and couldn't fully connect with her mother, but things seemed all well and good. That was until 1182, when after Crystal returned back from a trip to her father's parents on Earth, she came back seeming sad and full of worry. Astrid had hoped that it would pass, but it did not. Astrid and Jos did research and tried to figure out what could have happened to their daughter's smile, but they found nothing. Crystal would cry and frown and worry, and Astrid just couldn't take it. Once all of Mewni's doctors had no answers, she set out to Earth to search to try to find it. Astrid and Jos would go back and forth between Earth and Mewni until 1184, when a doctor finally had an answer for them. Crystal apparently caught a case of strep when she was with her grandparents, and it happened to be autoimmune, so the infection and cells went and attacked her brain instead of the illness, which resulted in her getting a mental disorder called pandas. Astrid asked the doctor if there was anything they could do to cure her, and he said it would just take time and treatment, and maybe, just maybe, she could get better. After that day, Astrid worked more and more with the doctors to try to help her daughter. She moved to Earth temporarily so it would be easier to get treatment and surgeries done. Astrid was devoted to seeing her daughter smile again, but this only seemed to draw them apart. In 1186, Astrid's grandfather Thomas would pass, and Astrid was there for her grandmother, who Astrid realized never really seemed surprised by anything, but still just as sad. As Crystal aged, Astrid and Jos would get into more and more arguments with their daughter, making things harder and harder for them all. Astrid just couldn't seem to understand Crystal and what it was she was thinking. When Crystal then started talking about imaginary friends at 12 years old, Astrid began to fear that they would never help her daughter recover. But she didn't give up hope, and she didn't stop trying to express her love. In 1188, Crystal would have her wand ceremony, and Astrid would say goodbye to her beloved crown wand and the memories it carried. In 1190, with almost no improvement in Crystal's health, Astrid decided that maybe what she needed was a friend. Astrid remembered when she was younger and her mother got her friend Sheska as a lady-in-waiting. She wanted to do something similar, but a little more different. She scoured the kingdom for a poor family in need until she came to the family of the Edricsons, where she decided to take and adopt the then 14-year-old Elizabeth into the butterfly family. Astrid had hoped that maybe this time she had done something her daughter would like, but unfortunately not. Crystal and Elizabeth did not get along, and in fact, Crystal had run away. Astrid and Joseph feared not at first, for Crystal had run away before in the past several times, but she always came back within a day or two. Unfortunately, fear began to come through as days passed and the princess had yet to return. Days turned to weeks, and Astrid and Joseph feared that they had actually lost their daughter. They searched and searched, but could not find her anywhere. Astrid cried with fear that her daughter could be dead. It had now been almost 3 months, and they were preparing for her cousin Calpurnia's son to take the throne. Elizabeth came up to Astrid and apologized, for if she had never come, maybe the princess might have never ran away. Astrid hugged Elizabeth and told her no, it wasn't her fault, and that she loved her very much. Astrid realized that if she lost one daughter, she wasn't going to lose the one right in front of her. It was midnight, 2 nights before the coronation, when Joseph heard the castle doors open. He woke Astrid, and they both tiptoed to see who had entered that time at night. They were prepared for an attack, but not what they saw. Their daughter Crystal, safe and home. Astrid ran to her daughter and hugged her in the best she could, saying how she missed her so much and she was so scared. It was then that Astrid realized that Crystal was holding someone's hand, and she turned to look, and saw a blue-haired man. Crystal smiled at her mom and introduced him as David, a man she met as she was traveling. Astrid tried to smile, but her worry grew. It then hit a high point when the next words came out of Crystal's mouth. "And we're going to get married." Astrid continued to try to smile as she urged them both to bed. They would talk more in the morning. Astrid then announced to the family that the coronation was off and that Crystal was back home, safe and sound. The next day, the story only seemed to worsen. David was a homeless boy that Crystal had met as she lived in the woods for 3 months. They met and decided to stick together, and now they wanted to get married. Astrid and Joseph tried to talk to their daughter, but she said calmly that she had made up her mind, and for some reason she wouldn't tell. She knew that David was the one for her. Their efforts to get to know David and convince their daughter otherwise lasted months longer. Astrid was afraid that David just wanted her title and riches. Who wouldn't? But Astrid said that it was his heart was pure. Months passed, and Astrid came to accept David. The winning factor was when she saw how he could make her daughter smile, a smile that she had not seen in so long. Once she saw that smile, she knew it was fact. They were in love, and were meant for each other. Despite demanding that they get married, they wouldn't actually be wed until 1193. The longest living queen in decades, Destiny Butterfly, would then pass in 1194, and Astrid mourned her mentor and grandmother, and the largest funeral for the queen would take place. As time passed, Astrid would ask her daughter when she would be ready to be queen, and when would she produce an heir, and Crystal always just turned her head and groaned, saying she would tell her when she was ready. It wasn't until 1197 that Crystal gave birth to her daughter Galexia, and later that year would take the throne. Astrid lived in relative peace from then on after, living happily with her husband, Elizabeth, and trying to help her daughter in any way she needed, which wasn't often that she asked. She would spend time with Galexia and smile, being able to see Crystal smile through her. Astrid's father John would go missing and be presumed dead in 1203, and Astrid mourned and wondered where he might have gone or what might have happened. King David would then pass in 1208, and Astrid tried to be there for Crystal as she wept and mourned. Astrid did her best to try to comfort Princess Galexia and softly explain the concept of death to her. The next years were spent by both her daughter's sides as well as her granddaughters. She was one day reading peacefully in the room while her husband was out at work, when she heard a knock on her door. She went over to see who it was and saw her granddaughter, and told her to follow. When she did, she was brought to Crystal's room, where her eyes then widened when she saw, laying on the floor, was her daughter. She rushed over to see if she was all right, but Galexia stopped her, saying that she was dead. The medical team were quickly called and escorted Astrid out of the room, where she cried. The doctors would then later confirm her worst fears, that Crystal was in fact dead. They had told her it seemed she would be from suffocation, which made no sense to Astrid because Crystal had just been lying there on the floor. Crystal's funeral would be held the following day, and Astrid was sad that not many of her people cared. Astrid hugged her husband, and they wept together for their daughter. Elizabeth simply wished they could have gotten to know each other more. As the years following passed, the former queen's memory would become worse and worse, and on many days Joseph would have to remind her of things. In 1218, they would move permanently into the summer home after Galexia's wedding, where they would both stay with one another, and occasionally Elizabeth and her family, until their deaths. Astrid and Joseph would be found dead on Oag 9th, 1232, holding each other's hands. They were both found to have died peacefully in their sleep, together. Galexia threw a grand funeral to her grandmother, where afterwards Astrid would join the rest of her family in the butterfly crypts. And that was the biography of Astrid, the Queen of Flames, by me, Raspberry Barrel, on DeviantArt. A link to my page in the description. Thank you all for listening. I hope you've enjoyed, and this was somewhat worth the wait. I'll see you guys next time. Have a great rest of your day, and goodbye for now.